Good afternoon, class.
Good afternoon, Miss Taphorn.
Today we are going to start a new book.
Ooh.
It's called Esperanza Rising.
Ooh.
Have any of you ever heard of this book before or read it before? No? Well, it's a chapter book, so it's long. So we're only going to start it today and read a little bit.
Oh.
And then we're only actually going to read the first 8 pages. And then we are going to read a little bit more of it every day, and eventually we're going to finish it.
Yay!
But before we get started, by a show of hands, have any of you ever had something really big change in your life? By a show of hands, who has had something really big change in their life? Yeah? What's something really big that's changed in your life?
I had to come to school.
Yeah, that's a big change when you have to come to school. And what about like moving to a different city or moving to a different country? Have any of you guys ever had to do that? What was that like? Was it hard? Yeah. Well, now for the next question, I want you to think in your brains. So don't raise your hands, and you don't have to say anything out loud. Just think in your brains. Have you ever lost something or someone who is very important to you? Just think. You don't have to answer. Just think. Have you ever lost anybody? And what was that like? Or what do you think it would be like if you haven't? Well, this book is about a girl named Esperanza who has to face both of these problems. And while we are reading today, I want you to focus on how Esperanza is feeling right now in this book and what you think is going to happen in the future. You guys know what the future is? It's something that hasn't happened yet. So what do you think is going to happen next in this book? That's what I want you to think about while we're reading today. But before we can start reading, we need to learn some new words so that we understand what's going on. Okay?
I love words.
So, have any of you ever been to a farm?
Mm-hmm.
Raise your hand if you've been to a farm. What was on that farm?
Cows.
Cows. Yeah, those are on farms. What else? Who else has been to a farm? Yeah. Okay. Well, our story.
Look at all those chickens.
Our story today takes place in a vineyard.
Ooh.
Have any of you guys know what a vineyard is?
Grapes.
Yeah, good job. A vineyard is a farm for grapes. They grow grapes.
That's
And here, it's a picture.
great. Ooh.
So, these are the words that I want you guys to know. This is a picture of a vineyard. So when we're listening to the story today, I want you to be picturing this picture right here as where it's taking place. These right here, these posts, are called arbors. They're what hold the grapes up. And you see how there's lines of plants? Those are the rows of the grape plants. So in the book, it's going to say rows of grapes, and those are the rows of grapes that it's talking about. Now, do you guys see how the earth kind of goes down and back up, but it's really small? So is that a hill? If it's that small, do you think it's a hill? No, that's not a hill. That's called a slope. Because in the book, it talks about slopes. So these are the slopes of the field. The other word that I want you guys to know is cluster. It talks about clusters of grapes. A cluster is just like a group. So it's a group of grapes. Can you guys picture grapes in your head for a minute? You know how they come in groups? Well, on the grape plant, they're called a cluster of grapes. That's how they grow. They grow in a group. And that group is called a cluster. Okay. And now, and there's a picture of a cluster of grapes. Another word that you will need to know is barn. You see how have any of you guys do any of you guys have a barn on your house or near your house? Yeah?
My neighbor has a barn.
Your neighbor has a barn? That's awesome. Does it look like that?
No.
No. Barns can be very different. What does your neighbor's barn look like?
It has big white windows on the side.
Oh, it has big white windows. Ah. So barns can look very different, but they're just a building that's usually on a farm that people can keep animals or tractors or machines in. The other word that you'll need to know is tendril. There's one line and it talks about how he's touching a tendril of the grapes. See these little green skinny pieces that come down from the leaves? Those are tendrils. Can anybody think of why a plant might need those tendrils? Why does it have tendrils? Why does it have, it looks like little fingers. Why would you think a plant would need little fingers coming out? Absorb moisture? That's a good guess. But no. The tendrils help the plant grow. They grab onto those arbors, those posts, the wooden posts. The tendrils grab onto them, and that's how the plant grows up. It grabs onto them. Okay? There's lots of different plants that have tendrils. Does anybody else know of any plants that might have these little tendrils? No? One of them is peas and green beans. They both have tendrils on them. And the other thing that you'll need to know for after we read the book is future tense, because we're going to be talking about the future. Because you remember, can anybody tell me what are we focusing on when we're reading this book? I said it earlier. Does anybody remember what I said? What are we going to be focusing on? I want you guys to think while I'm reading and focus on how Esperanza is feeling right now in this book. And I want you to focus on what you think is going to happen next. Which means, what are we talking about? If what's going to happen next? We're talking about the future. Can anybody tell me a sentence that says something they're going to do in the future?
I am going to eat grapes.
You are going to eat grapes. What part of that sentence is future? What word in there is the future?
Going to.
Going to. Good job. The other future word is will. So this weekend, I will be going to the store. Or tonight, I'm going to eat chicken. Those are two future sentences. We're going to practice those a little bit more later. So now that we know the words that we need to know, why don't we read our book? Okay. So, Esperanza Rising. Now, our author is Pam Munez Ryan. Aguas Calientes, Mexico, 1924. You see that at the top of the page there?
Mm-hmm.
What is that information at the top of the page telling us?
They're in Mexico.
They're in Mexico. And what else?
The
What else does it tell us?
The year.
The year. So it tells us the year and the location. What is that called?
Setting.
Setting. So that top of the page is telling us the setting. Why is it important for us to know the setting?
So you can know where the story is at.
So you can know where the story is at. Yeah. Okay. Our land is alive, Esperanza, said Papa, taking her small hand as they walked through the gentle slopes of the vineyard. Leafy green vines draped the arbors, and the grapes were ready to drop. Esperanza was 6 years old and loved to walk with her papa through the winding rows, gazing up at him and watching his eyes dance with love for the land. So if I go back to this picture of the vineyard, can someone come up to me and point out the arbors?
That.
Good job.
Yeah.
And can someone else come up and point out where the slopes are? Where's the slopes in our picture here?
That one.
You're right, those are our slopes. So they were walking through the gentle slopes of the vineyard, and leafy green vines draped the arbors, and the grapes were ready to drop. So I want you to look at that picture and use that, and I'm going to read this again. Taking her small hand as they walked through the gentle slopes of the vineyard, leafy green vines draped the arbors, and the grapes were ready to drop. Esperanza was 6 years old and loved to walk with her papa through the winding rows, gazing up at him and watching his eyes dance with love for the land. Okay, let's go on. This whole valley lives and breathes, he said, sweeping his arm toward the distant mountains that guarded them. It gives us the grapes, and then they welcome us. He gently touched a wild tendril that reached into the row as if it had been waiting to shake his hand. Does anybody remember what a tendril is?
It's the thing that helps it stay on the arbor.
Yeah, it's the thing that helps it stay on the arbor. He picked up a handful of earth and studied it. Did you know that when you lie down on the land, you can feel it breathe? That you can feel its heart beating? Poppy, I want to feel it, she said. Come. They walked to the end of the row, where the incline of the land formed a grassy swell. Papa lay down on his stomach and looked up at her, patting the ground next to him. Esperanza smoothed her dress and knelt down. Then, like a caterpillar, she slowly inched flat next to him, their faces looking at each other. The warm sun pressed on one of Esperanza's cheeks, and the warm earth on the other. She giggled. Shh, he said. You can only feel the earth's heartbeat when you are still and quiet. She swallowed her laughter, and after a moment said, I can't hear it, papi. Aguántate tantito, y la fruta caerá en tu mano, he said. Wait a little while, and the fruit will fall into your hand. You must be patient, Esperanza. She waited and lay silent, watching Papa's eyes. And then she felt it. Softly at first, a gentle thumping, then stronger, a resounding thud, thud, thud against her body. Can we do that? Ready? Go. Thud, thud, thud. She could hear it too, the beat rushing in her ears. Shwoomp, shwoomp, shwoomp. She stared at Papa, not wanting to say a word, not wanting to lose the sound, not wanting to forget the feel of the heart of the valley. She pressed closer to the ground until her body was breathing with the earth's and with Papa's, the three hearts beating together. She smiled at Papa, not needing to talk, her eyes saying everything, and his smile answered hers, telling her that he knew she had felt it. Las uvas, grapes. So right below the chapter, it says 6 years later.
Wow.
So she was 6 years old, and it's 6 years later. So how old do you think she is now?
12.
12. Good job. Right. Papa handed Esperanza the knife. The short blade was curved like a scythe, its fat wooden handle fitting snugly in her palm. Does anybody know what a scythe is? Let's look at a picture.
Yeah, please.
That is a scythe. So let's read the sentence again. The short blade was curved like a scythe, its flat wooden palm fitting snugly, or its flat wooden handle fitting snugly in her palm. So it was curved like this. This job was usually reserved for the eldest son of the wealthiest rancher, but since Esperanza was an only child and Papa's pride and glory, she was always given the honor. Last night she had watched Papa sharpen the blade back and forth across the stone, so she knew the tool was edged like a razor. Cuídate los dedos, said Papa. Watch your fingers. The August sun promised a dry afternoon in Aguascalientes, Mexico. Everyone who lived and worked on El Rancho de las Rosas was gathered to the edge of the field. Esperanza's family, the house servants in their long white aprons, the vaqueros, already sitting on their horses ready to ride out to the cattle. What do you guys think a vaquero is? It says the vaqueros already sitting on their horses ready to ride out to the cattle. If they're sitting on horses, what do you think they are?
Ranchers.
Ranchers, that's a good word for it. Can anybody think of another word? A good word in English for vaqueros is a cowboy. So these are the cowboys. And 50 or 60 campesinos, straw hats in their hands, holding their own knives ready. They were covered top to bottom in long-sleeved shirts, baggy pants tied at the ankles with string, and bandanas wrapped around their foreheads and necks to protect them from the sun, dust, and spiders. Now, I've got a bandana right here. Alright, so they had bandanas tied around their face and their necks to protect them from the sun. So, they had bandanas tied like this around them. Oh, there we go. See how the bandana is protecting my neck? So that's what they were wearing. Let's see. So, they were covered, let's read it again. They were covered top to bottom in long sleeve shirts, baggy pants tied at the ankles with string, and bandanas wrapped around their foreheads and necks to protect them from the sun, dust, and spiders. Why do you think they were dressed like that? Any ideas? Why would they be
Sunburn.
covered top to bottom?
To avoid sunburn.
To avoid sunburns, yeah, it says that. It says to protect them from the sun, dust, and spiders. So where were they going to work then? If they were worried about the sun and dust and spiders,
The desert.
they're in Mexico, so yeah, they're working in the desert. They're working out in the fields. Why don't you think they wear like a t-shirt out in fields? Why do they have to wear long baggy pants? Would it be smart to wear a t-shirt out in the fields?
No.
No. You'll get a sunburn. You could get dust everywhere. Esperanza, on the other hand, wore a light silk dress that stopped above her summer boots and no hat. On top of her head, a wide satin ribbon was tied in a big bow, the tails trailing in her long black hair. So what's Esperanza dressed like?
A casual Sunday.
A casual Sunday. Yeah. Was she dressed like the campesinos? No. Why do you think she wasn't dressed like the campesinos?
Because she's a girl.
Because she's a girl? Yeah, that could be true. Do you think she's going to work in the fields? No. Why is she not going to work in the fields?
She's a girl.
She's a girl. Let's see. The clusters were heavy on the vine and ready to deliver. So what were heavy on the vine?
The grapes.
The grapes. Yeah, the grape clusters. Esperanza's parents, Ramona and Sexto Ortega, stood nearby. Mama, tall and elegant, her hair in the usual braided wreath that crowned her head, and Papa, barely taller than Mama, his graying mustache twisted up at the sides. He swept his hand toward the grapevines, signaling Esperanza. When she walked toward the arbors and glanced down at her parents, they both smiled and nodded, encouraging her forward. So what were her mom and dad dressed like? What were her mama and papa dressed like? Should we read it again? Esperanza's parents, Ramona and Sexto Ortega, stood nearby. Mama, tall and elegant, her hair in the usual braided wreath that crowned her head, and Papa, barely taller than Mama, his graying mustache twisted up at the sides. So were they dressed like the campesinos? No. Why do you think they weren't dressed like the campesinos?
They aren't going to go work.
Yeah, they're not going to go work in the fields. The campesinos are going to go work in the fields. They're not going to go work in the fields. So do they need to wear those kind of clothes? Do they need to wear the baggy clothes and the bandanas? No, they don't need to wear those clothes because they're not going to work in the fields. When she walked towards the arbors and glanced back at her parents, they both smiled and nodded, encouraging her forward. When she reached the vines, she separated the leaves and carefully grasped a thick stem. She put the knife to it, and with a quick swipe, the heavy cluster of grapes dropped into her waiting hand. Esperanza walked back to Papa and handed him the fruit. Papa kissed it and held it up for all to see. La cosecha, said Papa. Harvest! Ole, ole! A cheer echoed around them. The campesinos, the field workers, spread out over the land and began the task of reaping the fields. So the campesinos, the field workers. So when I read this book, I see that it says the campesinos and then it says the field workers. So I know that the field workers are the campesinos. And began the task of reaping the fields. Reaping the fields. That sounds interesting. What do you think that means? They're reaping the fields.
Taking all the grapes from it.
They're taking all the grapes from it. So another word for that would be harvest. They're harvesting the grapes. They're picking the grapes. Esperanza stood between Mama and Papa with her arms linked to theirs and admired the activity of the workers. Papa, this is my favorite time of year, she said, the brightly colored shirts of the workers slowly moving among the arbors. Wagons rattled back and forth from the fields to the big barns where the grapes would be stored until they went to the winery. So we're out here in this field, and people are going out and they're picking the grapes, and then they're taking them to the barn and storing them there. Is the reason because when the picking is done, it will be someone's birthday and time for a big fiesta? Papa said. Esperanza smiled. When the grapes delivered their harvest, she always turned another year. This year, she would be 13. The picking would take 3 weeks, and then, like every other year, Mama and Papa would host a fiesta for the harvest and for her birthday. Marisol Rodriguez, her best friend, would come with her family to celebrate. Her father was a fruit rancher, and they lived on the neighboring property. So, they live on the neighboring property. Property means the land that somebody owns. So, it's like this chair. If this chair was my property, that would mean that I live right here. And so if I had a property line, that would be how far I own that land to. So let's say I own to here. That would mean that all of this right here is my property, and that's what I own. So Marisol, Esperanza's best friend, lived on the property next to hers. So she lived in the land next to hers. So that would be like you and me right here. You're close to me. So your property is right next to my property. So that's like Esperanza and her friend Marisol. They lived right next to each other. Even though their houses were acres apart, acres is just a fancy word for a long distance. It's kind of like the farmers use it instead of like miles or kilometers. They met every Saturday beneath the home oak on a rise between the two ranches. Her other friends, Chita and Bertina, would be at the party too, but they lived farther away, and Esperanza didn't see them as often. Their classes at St. Francis didn't start again until after the harvest, and she couldn't wait to see them. When they were all together, they talked about one thing, their quinceañeras. Anybody here know what a quinceañera is?
It's the party that the girls have when they turn 15.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does anybody have quinceañeras in their party, in their families? No? What about for your guys' birthday? Do your parents do anything special for your birthday? Yeah? Does anybody, raise your hand, does anybody have a party when it's their birthday? Yeah, me too. Does anybody have friends over? Yeah? Yeah, me too. Birthdays are fun. I do a lot of fun stuff on my birthday too.
Like what, Miss Tapborn?
On my birthday, I like to hang out with my friends and play games, like Uno.
Mm-hmm.
So, they talked about their quinceañeras, the presentation parties they would have when they turned 15. You were right. They still had 2 more years to wait, but so much to discuss. The beautiful white gowns they would wear, the big celebrations where they would be presented, and the sons of the richest families who would dance with them. After their quinceañeras, they would be old enough to be courted, married, and become las patronas, the heads of their households, rising to their positions of their mothers before them. Esperanza preferred to think, though, that she and her someday husband would live with Mama and Papa forever, because she could not imagine living anywhere other than El Rancho de las Rosas, or with any fewer servants, or without being surrounded by the people who adored her. That's as much as we're going to read today.
Oh.
So after reading that today, what do you guys think is going to happen next?
Maybe another time jump.
Another time jump? That's a good prediction. Yeah, that's a good prediction. I like that. Does anybody else? Turn to the person next to you. Turn to your shoulder partner, and I want you to talk to them about what you think is going to happen next in the story. I'm gonna check to see if that's still recording.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. What else do you guys think is gonna happen?
More grapes.
More grapes? I like that. I'm thinking that something big is gonna change. Because has anything bad happened in the story yet?
No.
No. And what do most stories have?
A conflict.
A problem. Yes, they have a problem. Yeah, most stories have a problem, so I think a problem is gonna happen. So, now that we've read this, we're going to do an activity. Okay? Miss Taphorn's got to find her paper here so I can show you. Okay. So, next. So, we just read this. So, you said that you think that it's going to have another time jump and it's going to be her quinceañera. Why do you think that?
Foreshadowing.
Foreshadowing. That's a big word. I like that word. What is foreshadowing? Can you tell the class?
It's when the book alludes to something in the beginning that will happen later.
Yeah, it's when the book kinda tells you about something that's gonna happen later. Yeah. So we're going to do a paper. We're gonna fill out a paper about predictions of what we think is gonna happen next. So,
I don't have a pencil.
I will get you a pencil. Uh-huh.
Can I write in pen?
Yes. Alright, I want you
I
to
don't have a pen.
take one paper and pass it around, and I will go get you a pencil or a pen. Here's a desk to write on, and a pen.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So, before we start this, I want to ask you some questions. So, yes, write your names at the top of the paper. And today's March 3rd. So, you've already turned to your shoulder partner and talked to them about what you think is going to happen next.
Mm-hmm.
Now I want you to turn back to them and tell them why you think that's going to happen next. Okay. Would anybody, raise your hand, would anybody like to share what they and their partner discussed? What did you and your partner discuss?
I elaborated on
Yes.
I expanded.
Yeah. Yes.
On
What did you expand on?
On the idea that the story will go to the quinceañera.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's already mentioned it, so it will probably happen later
Yeah.
in the story.
I like that idea. So, now when we're writing these, I predict. So, here's an example of the worksheet. So it says, I predict. So, in this first part, can somebody tell me what that first sentence right there says?
I predict that.
I predict that. So what do you think you're going to write in this box right here?
Something that I think might happen.
Something that you think might happen. Exactly. So you're going to write something that you think might happen right there. And if you're writing something that you think will happen, are we talking about right now?
No.
What are we talking about? Yeah. What's that called?
The future.
Yeah, we're talking about the future. So that's when you're going to be using those words will and going to. And then, can somebody tell me what that part right there says?
My evidence is.
Good job. I liked how you sounded that out. My evidence is. So what's evidence? So what are you writing there? What's that part?
Textual.
It's the why. So why do you think this is going to happen? So what in the book can you point to and tell me that that's why you think this is going to happen? And then down here at the bottom, you get to draw a picture of what you think is going to happen.
My favorite.
So you can use colors, you can draw however much you want. This is totally up to you, and you can be as creative as you want.
I forgot my color box.
That's okay. You can borrow some of my pencils, okay? Okay. Okay. So, before we start that, I want you to turn to your partner, your shoulder partner, and I want you to tell your shoulder partner, I want you to use one sentence using will and one sentence using going to, and talk about what you are going to do this weekend. So I'll start. This weekend, I am going to go to my sister's house. And I will watch the new movie, Captain Marvel. Okay? So I want you to use a will and a going to sentence, because those are the kind of sentences that you're going to be writing in your I predict. Okay? So turn to your shoulder partner now.
Okay. Where's Tapward? I don't have a partner.
I will be your partner.
Thanks.
Okay. What are you going to do this weekend?
This weekend, I am going to go hiking.
Ooh, that sounds fun. What's something else you're going to do? You said
I
going
will
to. You will.
Hike.
You will hike. That's a good sentence. I like it. Good job using future tense. All right, class. Can we come back together?
Yeah, guys.
All right. Now I'm going to give you time to do the worksheet. If you need help, you can raise your hand and I can check your sentences. Or you can ask the person next to you about one of your sentences.
What was evidence again?
That is a good question. Evidence is the why. So what happened in the book that made you think that this, what you predicted, is going to happen?
I didn't get to my illustration.
Oh, jeez. Okay. Thank you, class. So we're going to continue reading this book tomorrow. Now it's time for math.
Oh.